I stood frozen in the living room, staring at the stack of paperwork that had just been handed to me. My hands trembled, a cold wave of disbelief washing over me as I tried to make sense of the words on the page. The letter from the bank in my hand felt heavier than anything I had ever held before. Account balance: $0.00. It was the last place I expected to see a zero. For years, I had worked tirelessly, scrimping and saving every penny I earned. From the moment I started my first job as a barista during college to the countless overtime hours I put in at the law firm, all of it was for this one thing: my life savings. The account was meant to be my safety net, my cushion. It was my financial independence. It was everything I had sacrificed for. And now, it was gone. I could feel my chest tighten as my thoughts spiraled. No, this couldn't be right. I quickly scanned the account history, my heart racing as I saw large withdrawals made in the last few months. Each one a significant sum, each one tracing back to the same recipient: my sister, Emily. Emily, the one person who seemed to have it all, always the favorite, always the one everyone doted on. My parents had always loved her more, that was obvious. But this? This was a betrayal that hit deeper than I could ever have imagined. I gripped the edges of the paper, trying to steady myself. The money I had saved over the years, gone. The thought of how hard I had worked for it, the hours of sacrifice, the endless nights of worrying about my future, and all of it, without warning, taken for her. My mind raced. Was this a mistake? Could they have accessed my account by accident? But then I remembered the conversation I overheard last week between my parents. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help myself. They were discussing money: Emily's tuition, Emily's rent, Emily's startup business. "We've always supported her," my mom had said. "She needs it. You know how hard she's trying." The words stung. It wasn't just that they were helping Emily, they were ignoring me entirely. I had worked my way through college with scholarships and part-time jobs. I had taken out loans to get through law school, but in their eyes, I was always the self-sufficient one. They had always said I didn't need as much help, that I was capable of handling things on my own. But now I was seeing the truth for the first time. I had been taken for granted. My hard-earned savings, gone. "Mom, Dad?" My voice cracked as I called out, my body still frozen in place. I couldn't bring myself to go any further, not yet. I needed them to explain, to tell me this was a mistake. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't a mistake. They had done this. They had taken my future and handed it to Emily without a second thought. The door to the kitchen opened, and my mom stepped into the living room, her expression the same one I had seen 1,000 times before. Calm, collected, as if nothing was wrong. She glanced at me, her eyes darting quickly to the paper I was holding. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone light, almost dismissive. I could feel the rage building inside me. My hands were shaking now, and I could feel the tears starting to burn behind my eyes, but I swallowed them down, refusing to let her see me break. "Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Why did you take the money from my account?" Her face faltered for a moment, a brief flicker of guilt crossing her features. But it was gone so quickly that I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. She took a step toward me, her lips curling into that all-too-familiar smile. "Honey, it wasn't like that," she began, her voice gentle. "You've always been independent. You've always been able to take care of yourself. Emily, on the other hand, has struggled. She needs more help right now, and we're just trying to make sure she's okay." I could feel the anger welling up in my throat, threatening to spill over. This wasn't about Emily needing more help. This was about them choosing her again, making the same decision they always had, choosing her over me. "You can't just take my savings, Mom," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I earned that money. I worked for it." Mom looked at me, her expression not changing. "You don't need it as much. You've always been so capable. Emily, she's always needed more." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to block out the hurt. I had heard this all my life, how Emily needed more, how I could handle things on my own. But now it wasn't just words. They had taken something from me, something that was mine. "Where's Dad?" I asked, my voice tight. "He's in the study," she replied. "Why don't you come have a seat? We'll talk about this." But I couldn't sit down. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine, that I was just going to accept this like I had accepted everything else. I needed answers, and I needed to know if they had any idea what they had really done to me. I walked past her, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as I approached my father's study. The house felt suffocating now, the walls closing in around me with every step. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers. But I kept it together, my fists clenched at my sides. The years of being overlooked, of being told I could handle things on my own, were catching up with me. I knocked softly on the door, my knuckles barely tapping the wood. It felt like the calm before a storm, but I had no idea what the storm was going to look like. "Come in," my dad's voice called from inside. It was warm, friendly, like nothing was wrong. Like my entire world hadn't just been ripped apart. I opened the door slowly, stepping inside and closing it behind me. My father sat at his desk, papers scattered in front of him, his laptop open. But he looked up at me with that same calm expression, not even glancing at the paper I was still holding in my hand. "Hey kiddo, what's up?" he asked casually, as if we were about to talk about anything but what had just happened. I stood there for a moment, staring at him, at the man who had always been my rock, the one who had taught me how to ride a bike, how to drive, how to stand up for myself, the man who had now taken away everything I had worked for without a second thought. "Dad," I began, my voice quieter than I intended. But the words were sharp. "Why did you take my savings? Why did you steal from me?" He blinked, the smile slowly fading from his face. I could see the moment of realization hit him, and for a brief second, there was a flash of guilt in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced with defensiveness. "What are you talking about?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "We didn't steal anything, sweetheart. We helped Emily with her tuition, her business. She needed it." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The same justification they had given my mom was now coming from him too. The same excuse. Emily needed more help. She deserved more. "No, Dad," I said, stepping forward, the anger now bubbling up. "You didn't help her. You took my money, my savings. And you didn't even think about how that would affect me." He didn't respond right away, his eyes darting to the paper in my hand. He hesitated, running a hand through his hair before slowly standing up from his chair. We thought you'd be okay. You've always been fine on your own," he said, his voice softer now, but I could hear the underlying defensiveness in his tone. "Emily's always needed more guidance, more support. We just thought—" I shook my head, cutting him off. "You thought what? That I didn't deserve the same help? That I didn't need to be treated the same as her? You took my savings without even asking, without even telling me. You just assumed I would be fine?" There was a pause, an uncomfortable silence hanging between us. My father shifted his weight, the tension in the air palpable. His eyes softened for a moment, but his next words were anything but comforting. "It's not like that, honey. We've always done what we thought was best for you and Emily. We knew you didn't need the same kind of help. You've always been the responsible one, the one who never complained. Emily's always needed more of our attention. You've always been able to handle everything." I felt my heart sink, the weight of his words crushing me. The responsible one, the one who never complained. That was all I had ever been to them, someone who could take care of herself, who didn't need to be coddled, who didn't need the same attention as Emily. "Do you have any idea what I sacrificed to get that money?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now. "Every penny I saved, every hour I worked, and you just took it. You didn't even think twice." There was a flicker of something in my father's eyes, regret, maybe, or guilt. But it was fleeting, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off before he could say anything else. "Do you even care about what this means to me?" I pressed. "Do you care that you've made me feel invisible? Again? I worked harder than Emily. I didn't have you footing the bill for everything. I didn't have you paying my way. But now I'm left with nothing." I could feel the tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, but I fought them back. This was about something bigger than me being upset. This was about standing up for myself after all these years of silently accepting being overlooked, of being the one who always took a back seat. "You've always treated Emily like she's the one who needs help," I continued, my voice growing steadier. But it's me. I've always needed something too. I needed you to see me, to see how hard I've worked, how much I've done to build my life. My father's gaze dropped to the floor, and for the first time in this conversation, I saw him falter. I didn't mean to hurt you, honey, he said softly. But the apology didn't feel real. It was too little, too late. I don't think you realize what you've done, I said, shaking my head. I don't think you've ever seen me as equal to Emily. I don't think you ever will. The words hung heavy in the air between us, the weight of years of unspoken resentment spilling out in a single moment. I wasn't sure if my father fully understood what I was saying, but I knew that I couldn't take it back. I'm done being the responsible one, I said, turning to leave. I'm done letting you decide what I need. As I walked out of the study, my heart was still pounding in my chest, but it was no longer out of fear or frustration. It was out of a strange, quiet realization. I had just crossed a line that I wasn't going to let anyone cross again. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to stand by and let them steal my future. Not anymore. I left my father standing in his study, his words still echoing in my ears. I could feel the anger and hurt bubbling just beneath the surface, but it was different now. Something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just the daughter they thought could handle everything anymore. I wasn't just the one who would quietly accept being overlooked. As I walked through the house, I realized I had never really had control over anything. Growing up, it was always Emily who needed the extra attention, Emily who needed the extra help. My parents had been so fixated on her, on making sure she had the support she needed, that they never realized I had quietly been building my own future, in the shadows, all on my own, that hidden account. The one I had kept secret for years. It was my escape. The money I had set aside in that account had always been meant for something bigger than just getting by. It was meant for me. I had opened it right after I started my first job, when I realized how little my parents would help me financially. They didn't give me the same kind of assistance they gave Emily. It wasn't that I wanted their help. I was proud of how I managed to make ends meet on my own, but I had still needed something to fall back on, something to protect me when everything else seemed out of reach. I didn't even tell Emily about it. I hadn't even told my best friend. It was something I kept to myself, a quiet rebellion against the system my parents had built, the system that had always valued my sister more. But now, standing there in my parents' house, I realized that they had taken everything from me, except that account, the one they didn't know about, the one that had been my secret lifeline. I walked into my room and grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed the number for the bank. My heart was racing as I waited for the automated voice to pick up. And when it finally did, I punched in the code to check my balance. The silence stretched out before the voice on the other end confirmed what I already knew. My savings, the money I had so carefully built up over the years, was still intact. Every penny, it was still there. The relief that washed over me was almost overwhelming. I had something that was mine, not Emily's, not my parents', mine. I sat on my bed for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. The realization hit me like a freight train. I had been working towards my independence all along, but I had been hiding it from the very people who had tried to control my life. The hidden account wasn't just a bank account, it was my power. It was the key to my future. But the question still lingered. What was I going to do with it now? I had never planned for this. I had never imagined that my parents would take so much from me. They had crossed a line I hadn't thought possible. And now I needed to decide how to use this newfound power, whether to confront them or to keep it hidden and go on with my life, separate from them, free from their control. I stood up, pacing across the room as I thought about my next steps. I could tell them about the account. I could show them that I wasn't some helpless child they could keep controlling. But part of me wondered if that would just play into their narrative, that I needed to be rescued, that I still couldn't manage on my own. This wasn't about proving anything to them anymore. This was about me, about taking control of my life once and for all. I had worked hard for this, and no one could take that away from me, not my parents, not Emily. I pulled my laptop from the desk and began looking into my options. I could use this money to finally invest in something I had always dreamed of, a career I loved, a life I could call my own, without having to rely on my parents or anyone else for validation or support. As I researched, a part of me hesitated. I thought about Emily, the sister I had always loved despite everything. What if I could use the money to help her, to fix the situation, to show her that I wasn't just the bitter sister who had been left behind? But the truth was, I didn't want to fix things anymore, not for them, not for anyone but myself. I had spent my whole life trying to live up to their expectations, trying to prove I was worth something, and it had never been enough. No, I wasn't going to fix things. I wasn't going to bail anyone out. I had to start living for myself. It was time. I closed my laptop and stood in front of the mirror, looking at my reflection. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see a daughter caught in a web of parental expectations. I didn't see the person who had spent years trying to live up to everyone else's idea of who I should be. I saw someone who was finally ready to take the world on her own terms. And I was done hiding. The next steps wouldn't be easy. The confrontation with my parents was inevitable. I had to face them, had to make them understand that I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't just the responsible one anymore. I was the one who would take charge of her life, and I was going to show them all that I didn't need their approval. The next few days passed in a blur, the weight of everything I discovered pressing down on me like a heavy cloud. I couldn't escape the realization that my parents had taken what was mine without asking, without even considering how it would affect me. It gnawed at me constantly, the betrayal sharp and painful, no matter how much I tried to push it aside. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no way around it. I had to confront them. I had to make them understand the full extent of what they had done. And I couldn't just let this fester. It would eat me alive if I didn't say something. I had spent years silently accepting the role they had cast me in, the responsible, self-sufficient daughter who didn't need help. But now, with my hidden account in place, I finally had the power to reclaim my independence, to show them that I wasn't some charity case they could take from whenever it suited them. So I called them both, my heart pounding as I dialed their numbers, unsure of what I was going to say, but knowing that I couldn't keep quiet any longer. "Hey, Mom. Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the nerves clawing at my insides. "We need to talk." "Of course, honey. About what?" My mom's voice came through the phone, casual, unaware of what was coming. "I'll be at the house in an hour," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. "It's important." I hung up before they could say anything else, not wanting to hear their excuses. I didn't need to hear them try to justify their actions again. I had heard enough. I needed to act. When I arrived at their house, the place felt strangely quiet, as though it was waiting for something to happen. I walked in, and my parents were sitting at the kitchen table, the same place where we had shared countless family dinners, where they had comforted me after every failure and celebrated every small victory. But today was different. Today, I wasn't the daughter who silently accepted the scraps they gave me. Today, I was the woman who had learned to take care of herself and who had finally realized that she deserved more. I stood at the edge of the kitchen, holding the letter from the bank, the one that proved everything I had discovered. My parents glanced up, smiling at first, but when they saw the serious expression on my face, their smiles faltered. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" my dad asked, his voice suddenly laced with concern. I didn't answer. Instead, I held up the letter and placed it on the table between us. "This is the letter from my savings account," I said, my voice clear and firm. "The one you emptied without asking. The one you took from me to give to Emily." The room fell silent. My mother's face turned pale, and my father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't thought I would confront them, and now I could see the realization dawn on their faces. "We didn't think it was a big deal, honey," my mom said, her voice shaky now, the calmness gone. "Emily needed it. She's struggling. We thought you wouldn't mind." I felt a sharp sting in my chest, the hurt from their words cutting deeper than anything I could have imagined. "You thought I wouldn't mind. You took my money, my hard-earned savings, and you didn't think I would mind?" My father looked away, his eyes darting to the floor. He opened his mouth to speak but closed it again, clearly unsure of how to respond. His typical confidence, the one that had always been so unshakable, was gone. "We just didn't know what else to do," he said finally, his voice small. "Emily's always been more fragile, more dependent. We thought you'd be fine. You've always been fine." The words hit like a slap. More fragile, more dependent. They had always seen Emily as the one who needed help, the one who needed to be saved. But I had been just as fragile, just as dependent in my own way. I had always tried to hide it, to prove I could do everything on my own. But in the end, it was clear that they had never seen me for who I truly was. "I didn't want to be fine," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. "I didn't want to be the strong one, the one who could handle everything. I wanted to be treated like an equal. I wanted to be seen, really seen, by you. But you never did." My mother's eyes filled with tears, and my father's face softened, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for them. They had stolen from me, and no apology could fix that. "We never meant to hurt you, sweetheart," my mother whispered, her voice cracking. We thought you'd be okay. You always are." I stood there, looking at both of them, the tears threatening to spill but refusing to let them. I had cried enough in silence, had been overlooked enough. It was time for me to stop running from my own truth, to stop hiding my feelings just to keep the peace. "I have my own life now, Mom. Dad," I said, my voice steady, though it shook with emotion. "I don't need you to take care of me. I never needed you to. But I do need you to stop treating me like I'm invisible. I need you to treat me like I matter, like my dreams, my achievements. My hard work mattered just as much as Emily's." They didn't speak for a long time, and when they finally did, it wasn't an apology I heard, it was an admission. "I think we've been wrong," my dad said quietly, his voice almost regretful. "We never saw it like that before. It wasn't enough, but it was something." And for the first time, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. "I'm done waiting for your approval," I said, my voice firm. "And I'm done letting you make decisions for me. I'm not a child anymore." They both fell silent again, their eyes downcast. There was nothing more to say. I had made my point. And with that, I walked away from the table, from the family that had always seen me as the responsible one, the one who could handle it all. But I wasn't that person anymore. I was someone else now, and for the first time, I felt free. The days that followed the confrontation were filled with a strange sense of calm, mixed with a deep, gnawing uncertainty. I had said what I needed to say. I had finally confronted my parents about the theft, about the years of neglect. But it didn't feel as liberating as I had hoped. Instead, I felt detached, like I was watching a scene unfold from a distance, as if I were still trying to figure out who I was in the aftermath of everything. I kept waiting for the apology, the gesture of reconciliation, the acknowledgement that what they had done was wrong. But it never came. The silence between us grew. My father, who had always been quick with words, seemed to have no defense left. My mother, once so nurturing, couldn't even look me in the eye when I passed her in the hall. I didn't know what I expected, really. A miracle? That they would change overnight and suddenly realize their mistake. That wasn't going to happen. Not when they had spent my entire life justifying their actions, blaming Emily's struggles for everything that went wrong. But this silence, it was suffocating. It made me question everything I thought I knew about my family. My sister, Emily, tried to talk to me a few days after the confrontation. She sent me a message asking if I was okay. I didn't know how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to reach out to her, to explain everything. But the truth was, I didn't think she could understand. Not fully. She had always been the golden child, the one who never had to fight for attention. And now that I had taken the spotlight, I wasn't sure where she stood. When we finally spoke, it was awkward. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, as if she was trying to figure out how to approach me without causing further tension. "I heard about what happened with Mom and Dad," she said, her voice soft. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied, but I could hear the lie in my own voice. "I don't know what to say," she continued, almost nervously. "I had no idea they took your money. I thought you just had it all together. I never realized how much they'd been favoring me." I sighed, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. Emily was trying, but it felt too little, too late. She had always been unaware of the imbalance, just as I had once been. But now, the damage was done. I don't know what to say either, I responded, trying to keep my emotions in check. They've always treated you like you were the one who needed everything, and I've always had to be the one who could take care of myself. It's hard, Emily. It's hard to realize that I've been fighting for attention and recognition for years, and they've never even noticed. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said quietly. I never asked for all the help. I don't want you to feel like I don't care. I know, I said, my voice softer now. It's not your fault. It's just, I need them to see me. I need them to realize that I matter too. After a long silence, Emily spoke again. I don't want you to think I'm not on your side. I'm sorry I never saw it. But maybe it's time for all of us to change. I don't know how things will go with Mom and Dad, but I'll be here for you, always. For the first time in a long time, I believed her. Maybe Emily and I weren't so different after all. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter for both of us. As the weeks passed, the tension in the house lingered, but it wasn't as suffocating. The silence between me and my parents remained, but it was no longer a wall between us. It was a space, an unspoken acknowledgement of everything that had happened, everything that had been said. My father began to show small signs of regret, like when he would ask me how my day went, or when he offered me advice on a case I was working on. But I could tell he was still uncomfortable, unsure of how to fix what he had broken. It wasn't until a month later that my mom finally spoke up. I've been thinking about what you said, she said, sitting down next to me at the kitchen table one evening. Her voice was low, almost tentative. And I'm sorry, I see now that I treated you differently than Emily, and I didn't realize how much that hurt you. I've always been so focused on her needs that I forgot to see you, really see you. I didn't know what to say at first. I wasn't sure if it was too little too late, or if this was finally the moment where things would begin to shift. But I looked at my mom, really looked at her, and saw the sincerity in her eyes. For the first time, I felt like she was truly seeing me. I don't need your help, Mom, I said softly, the words coming out more gently than I expected. I never did, but I needed your respect. I needed you to treat me like I mattered, like I was worth the same amount of effort as Emily. My mom nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. I know, I didn't understand that until now. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't an apology I had dreamed of, but it was a start. And for the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. The next few months were a blur of change. I had used the money I had saved in my hidden account to invest in a new business venture, a dream I had been putting off for years. I didn't want to rely on my parents anymore. I didn't want to feel like I had to be a part of their narrative. I wanted to build my own path, separate from the roles they had tried to force on me. The business was taking off faster than I expected. I had never felt more alive, more in control of my own future. It wasn't easy. There were late nights and stressful decisions, but every success, no matter how small, was a testament to my hard work. Emily and I had begun to repair our relationship too. We talked more openly now about our family dynamics, about how we both had been treated differently, but how we could move forward without the burden of competition. We were learning to support each other in ways we never had before. My parents, while still struggling with their own guilt, had started to accept that things couldn't go back to the way they were, but I could see them trying. My mom called me more often, just to check in on how things were going. My dad, though awkward at times, was offering me business advice. And as much as I resented them for their past actions, I also began to realize that they were human, flawed, but capable of change. And me? I had finally stopped waiting for them to see me. I had stopped depending on their approval. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself, carving my own path, and embracing the future I had always dreamed of. As I sat in my office one quiet afternoon, looking out at the city skyline, I realized how far I had come. I wasn't the same person I had been when I walked into my parents' house, that day when everything changed. I had been filled with anger and resentment, but now there was only peace. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up. My business was thriving, I was finally in control of my future, and most importantly, I had learned to trust myself again. No longer did I need to seek validation from my parents or anyone else. I had found my own voice. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Emily. "I'm proud of us, sis. We've come a long way." A few seconds later, her reply popped up. "Me too. I think this is just the beginning for both of us." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. This was my life. Finally, it was mine to live. And I was ready to take on whatever came next.